Hello, I'm Paul Johnson with The Optimistic American. We exist to try to help rekindle the American spirit, but I want to tell you a little secret. And it's this: if you can learn to listen to people and to work with people that you don't agree with, it not only will make you happier, you'll make more money, and you'll create a better version of yourself. Let me repeat that. If you can learn to work with people that you don't agree with, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, conservatives or liberals, you will find greater happiness, you'll make more money, and you'll create a better version of yourself. Now, today's guest is an award-winning journalist. She has been voted as one of the best speakers in Utah. She's done speeches in front of groups and in front of a variety of different panels. She's even done a TED Talk. Peri Kinder really is a fun guest. She has a great podcast called Life and Laughter. She's enjoyable to listen to. She's a good person, and I think you're going to enjoy this show. And hopefully it helps you figure out how to listen to people and to work with people that maybe you don't agree with. Welcome to the Optimistic American Podcast. Peri, welcome to the Optimistic American.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. I'm so excited to be on your show. This is really exciting for me.
All right. Now, you have not only been an award-winning journalist, you're a columnist that's a humorist, but you have this podcast called Life and Laughter. Now, I know that you've cut over 100 shows on them. I've listened to a number of them. I can't tell you that I've listened to all of them, but I've listened to a number of them, and they're enlightening, they're fun, they're enjoyable. It's a positive outlook. I really enjoyed it. I encourage all of my guests to listen to it. But one of the things that I found in podcasting, probably my favorite thing, is the person who benefited the most from my podcast is me. Right? I learned a tremendous amount from listening to people and understanding my guests and what it is that they're thinking. And it definitely has had an effect on shaping my point of view. Here's my question to you. After 100 podcasts, how has your message changed? What's the big message that you've come away with, and what have you learned from it?
Wow, the big message for my podcast has definitely evolved over the past couple of years. I think it started off wanting to be kind of a more fun interaction with people, which I hope it still is. But as I started talking to more guests and getting into my solo episodes, the message really became about connection and about how we are all the same. We all want the same things. We all want the same things for our families. And I think it's become more about the way we connect in the world with ourselves and with each other. And what I've learned a lot is to stop talking, to let my guests speak and not have to have my podcast so structured that it's able to flow and we're able to improvise a little bit more and bring in different topics. So being a little bit more relaxed with what I have structured for my podcast. And with my solo episodes, which I started about a year and a half ago, learning how to trust my own voice, which I think I used my guests as a crutch for the first 6 months. And using my solo podcast, my solo episodes has been really powerful to get my message of connection out there. But learning how to trust myself was huge.
Okay, so here's what I found interesting in listening to your podcast. You put a large focus on relationship. You put a focus on how we can become better as individuals by addressing our fears and gaining courage. There were a number of topics that were very individual. Now, I'm a little more of a sociologist. I was mayor of the city of Phoenix. I put a big focus on how do we get people to work together. And that really has been my focus. Now, what I find to be fascinating is this. I have friends who will tell me constantly, by the way, on both the right and the left, they will say this. The only way that we're going to be successful is that one side has to completely destroy the other side. One side has to win the House, the Senate, the presidency, the courts. And if they can do that, if they're successful at that, then they can determine the agenda for this country. And so the other side just has to be beaten completely. Now, there's a problem with that. There's another election in 2 years, and then another one 2 years after that. And so, of course, sooner or later, the other side starts to come back in. So the way you fix that get rid of elections. Right now, that's not their intent today. But when you begin to have that belief, we have to beat the other side. That's what happens. Now, here's why I think yours are so interesting. You're dealing with individual relationships. I think about if I were to have to go deal with my spouse and I said, hey, there's only one way this marriage is going to work. I have to completely, utterly destroy her, right? Good luck.
Right.
Good luck on that working, right?
Great marriage, yeah.
Right. And so your message about talking to individuals about how to build a better relationship is the same thing done on a one-on-one basis that I think that we need to try to do as a society.
Absolutely.
So I want to start with that. You talk about this concept of bad othering. Explain that for me. Help me understand what that means.
Bad othering is anytime we put another person or another group into the category that if they would just change, everything would be fine. They're doing all the bad things, and we have no onus in that situation. If they would just stop whatever they're doing, those bad other people, then society would be fixed, our marriages would be fixed, everything would be, rainbows and unicorns. And it's not accurate. We have to stop bad othering other people because to them, we're the bad others. So when you think of yourself as somebody thinking about you as the bad other, that kind of puts things in a different light. So it's just the labeling of ideas and people and groups that's causing so much division right now.
So what are the signs that someone's doing that? How do you begin to know not that others are doing it, but that maybe you're doing it yourself?
Yeah, that's hard. That's a lot of self-awareness, which takes a lot of practice. I'm going to share a story with you. Doesn't always put me in the best light, but I'm going to share it anyway. I was driving down the street and there's a woman carrying several bags of groceries, and she was walking home. And I thought, I'm not in a rush. I'm going to pull over. I'm going to see if she wants a ride. And I pulled over and she did. She wanted a ride home and she was very grateful, so grateful. And we put her groceries in my back seat and she climbed in the front seat of my car and I'm driving her home and we're just talking, she's a stranger. I don't know anything about this woman. And we're just talking about the day and how beautiful it was. And we get to her house and I immediately feel my body tense up because on the side of her house was a sign that said, "Don't blame me, I voted for Trump." And so immediately she went from being a stranger to me to being a bad other. I don't always agree with our former president. I think some of his policies were divisive, but I put this woman in that category that suddenly she's a bad other. And I felt that in my body because I'm trying to stop doing that. And so it was very obvious when it happened that she'd become not a friend or a stranger anymore, but somebody else who was destroying the country. And I had to consciously still talk nice to her and to be kind because that's my motto, is to be kind to everybody. And I asked her if she wanted help carrying her groceries in the house and she didn't. And I told her goodbye, told her to have a good day. And I drove away and I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed of my behavior, of my reaction to her. And I wondered even if I had seen her walking down the street, if I would have even stopped, if I'd known if she was wearing a MAGA hat or a MAGA shirt, if I would have stopped at all. And I don't know. I think now I would have because I've really been working on this about myself, about not bad othering other people. But at the time, it was such a poignant reminder to me that we all bad other people. And it takes a lot of conscious effort to notice when your thoughts turn to, she's the one destroying the country. She's the one destroying our community. She's the one that wants everybody to be this way. And that's just not the case. She was just a person who needed help. And I was there to help her. And we need to do more of that without the judgment and the shame and the blame that we place on people because it's destroying us as a society, absolutely destroying us.
Yeah, I like taking it back again to the point you make in your podcast over and again, which are how we work in individual relationships. Here's what I know. If with my brother or my spouse, if we get into an argument and I go to in my head, well, they're just a jerk. That's the problem. They're just a jerk, right? What I've done is I've labeled them. Mm-hmm. And once I've labeled them, I begin to create, one, a justification in my mind for why I can treat them badly, why I can say something to them that I shouldn't say, why I can try to hold them account, why I can begin to talk to them about what their problem is. And so, in effect, I'm betraying myself, because if I want that relationship to work with my spouse or my brother, it's obvious that if I do that, it's not going to be successful. And I'm going to begin to objectify that other person. Now, incredible atrocities have happened across the planet from people objectifying other groups.
Oh,
But when you
definitely.
objectify another person in your personal relationship, you create a wall between you. Now, here's the issue. The question becomes, how do you fix that? Because communication by itself won't do it, right? If I go communicate with somebody that I think is a jerk, my communication might be really bad, right? If I decide, well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to listen to them. Well, that's helpful. It's more helpful than talking to them, because at least you're understanding their side. But the real issue is you have to change your perspective from seeing them as an object to seeing them as a human being. And once you see them as a person, it becomes easier to say, well, maybe I had to figure out why they feel the way that they feel. Maybe I ought to be more empathetic to them. Maybe I ought to try to see what my problems are and where maybe I'm overlooking something, and begin to try to understand the world from their side. But so often we think if we do that, we lose. We lose if we do that, as opposed to seeing it as, no, we both won. So my question to you is, while I think it's easy for me to identify that when that happens, a bad othering, how do we reverse it? How do you think we reverse it?
Yeah, I think what I do is I drill down into why I think this person is a bad other. If you're watching the news or social media, which really creates an atmosphere of bad othering, because you get shown what you look for, and it helps create that divide even more. I try to drill down into why I think they're bad othering, and based on their behavior. Now, why is this person yelling? Why is this person screaming? Why is this person acting this way? And it always drills down into fear. We're afraid of what's going to happen if the bad others take over, or the bad others are in charge. And all of the behavior that we have, my fear is rooted, their fear is rooted, and it comes out as the bad othering. And so to reverse that, I think we first need to identify that we're doing it, to everybody all the time. And that takes a lot of practice and a lot of self awareness. You have to sometimes overcome even generational or years of programming from your families, from your society. You have to start questioning things. Why am I so reactive to this situation? And it really comes down to individual reaction. And if everybody took the time to not attack first and to listen first, I know you said that listening doesn't solve the problem, but it's a really good place to start, to have those conversations with people about, why do you think this way? I don't understand. Help me to understand a little bit more. And so drilling down into the idea that people are afraid and their behavior reflects that fear all the time. And to acknowledge that, I think, is very, very powerful.
So you spent a lot of time in your podcast talking about kindness. Can you talk to me about, I mean, everything that you're saying is about how to be kind, but if you can, give me what you've learned about the importance of kindness.
Yeah, it's such an it takes effort, but it's an easy effort, but it's a very conscious effort. I don't know if you heard my one of my latest podcasts. I talked to Tom Merrill. He's the producer of a show
I
called
did.
Random Acts, and he talks about kindness as being our obligation to society, that it's our job to learn how to be kind without expecting payback or having anything returned to us. Just being unconditionally kind is so valuable because it changes lives. If you're kind to someone who is being who is attacking you, if you can respond in kindness, or trying to be understanding, or not lashing back, because it's the lashing back that causes that wall that you talked about, that divide, to become even bigger. And kindness is huge. Small acts of kindness go such a long way. And I think the more we practice finding the opportunities to be kind, the more you're going to find them. And I love what Tom says in the podcast about he checks in with his spouse every night. What did you do that was kind? What did you do for others that were kind? He talks to his children. What happened to you? Who was kind to you today? And as you start recalling those things, it becomes a practice during the day. Like you wake up, okay, what can
Oh,
I
that's
do
beautiful.
to be kind today? Yeah.
Hmm.
I thought it was a great practice and a great thing that I've been trying to incorporate since I talked to him. I thought it was a great piece of advice.
I've had family members who have. I was a Democratic mayor. I'm an independent today. And as I become an independent, it's become easier for me to look at the excesses of both sides and say, I think you've kind of gone over the line as well. Now, the challenge with that is that both sides now sometimes think I'm the bad guy, especially in my family, right? They both think that I'm still on.
You become the bad other, yeah.
They have no desire to believe that it's possible that someone could be willing to listen to both sides and draw the best from both of them. But what I like about the idea of practicing this with loved ones is I can get more forgiveness, pre-forgiveness. So I've had discussions with family members who I said, hey, look, I don't really understand your point of view on this. I don't understand where you're coming from on this. I'd love to have a long-term conversation with you on it, but what I want to try to do is to practice getting better at having a nice conversation with one another. And so if we get out of control, let's stop, let's pre-forgive one another, and then let's come back and do it again. And doing that with people who care about me and that I care about and that I know have at least enough sense of agency that they can do it. Not everyone can do it. There are some people who are so stuck in their ideological way. They're having that conversation is going to be a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm fortunate. I have 9 brothers and sisters, and I have a lot of double cousins and a big family, and we get together 2 or 3 times a week in big, large groups. So it's been easy for me to pull it out. But this is not an easy thing to practice with people you don't know. All right, it can become much more difficult. But practicing with your spouse, saying, I'm going to be nice to her. I'm going to be kind to her. I'm going to listen to the things that she says that when I first hear it, the hair stands up on the back of my neck and my hands start to rise up, right? The answer is, okay, this is a good time for me to practice my kindness.
Right.
It pays benefits immediately. And you also start to learn how to deal with other people who have adverse opinions to you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the more we are willing to accept that other people think we're the bad others sometimes, that puts things in perspective that, I don't consider myself a bad other, but as a lifestyle columnist, I get lots of letters from people who think I'm the bad other. How could you write about that? How could you say that? And the first time it happened, I was just shocked that not everybody agreed with me. It's like, what are you talking about? And so learning how to take their criticism and their comments with grace and really being curious about what they're saying to me. Like, maybe I did cross the line. Maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. My columns aren't going to resonate with everybody. My podcast won't resonate with everybody, but I want it to be a place where people feel they can come and maybe gain some tools of how they can become better in their everyday interactions. I think that everyday interactions with people is where change starts. We can't control what's happening all over the world. And like you said, there are atrocities happening. Horrible things happening. People are suffering, civilians, children, they're dying. And we can't change that. We don't have any effect over that. But we have this small corner of the world here that we have 100% effect on. And that ripples out. So as I'm kind to my family, I'm kind to my husband, I'm kind to my children and my grandchildren and my neighbors, that ripples out. And maybe in some way that does affect things farther away from my little corner of the world, because kindness is such a ripple effect and it changes you. It changes you in a very, very metaphysical way.
How can we identify when we're not being kind to ourselves?
Oh, negative talk is huge. And it's hard because we grow up with the ideas in our heads that we're a certain way. Maybe our families have told us or our school teachers have told us. So we grow up with all of these labels that we give ourselves and kind of embrace. And to learn how to let go of those labels, it takes a lot of awareness and practice. When you find yourself berating yourself or punishing yourself for behavior. You need to say, wow, I'm really bad othering myself right now is happening, and stop that. And maybe think of 3 things you did that day or even that month that proves that what you're thinking just isn't true. And it takes a lot of effort to overcome that negative talk, the self-doubt, the self-persecution, the self-blame. But it takes a conscious effort, and it can be overcome. You can learn how to become friends with yourself and to stop bad othering yourself. It happens.
So, in one of your early podcasts, you did a discussion about the imposter syndrome. How does that play into this?
Yeah. It comes up so easily if you're in a situation where you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel qualified, you're thinking, everybody thinks I don't belong here, everybody thinks I'm not qualified to be here. And that really can spiral into self negative talk really quickly. And understanding that you belong. So much of the division here in this world is the idea that we don't belong to each other anymore. And embracing that idea of belonging to yourself, to your community, really helps reverse that imposter syndrome, although it flares up all the time. Every time you try something new, every time you meet new people, you're going to have it rise up and think, wow, do I really fit in here? Do they like me? And it'll be an ongoing thing for the rest of your life. You just have to be aware of it.
What I was interested in that podcast was the discussion that it's not a pathology. This isn't a sickness that almost everyone, I think the number was in the 90 percentiles, that people have it. Now, I've always believed, which the guest that you had on disputed, that women had a bigger problem with the imposter syndrome than men. But both of us do. Both sides have that problem.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're more vocal about it. We're more willing to say, wow, I feel really uncomfortable right now. I don't know if men are comfortable doing that yet.
Yeah, so I mentor a lot of people, and what I find is that I mentor people who are going to do one of 2 things: either go into politics or go into business, because I have a background in both of them. And what I find is that the men, at least on the surface, have a much higher level of self-confidence, and they're willing to jump into it. And the women who I get in, especially those trying to become entrepreneurs, have a lot of self-doubt about themselves. And what I really find to be interesting is that I meet with them in a group usually, and oftentimes the men will notice this. The women actually have more skills than they have, but less confidence about doing it. And the men have less skills, but they're absolutely confident to be able to jump out and say, I can tackle this. Right. Now, I don't know where that comes from, but I know that what's more worrisome to me is the whole idea of self-sabotage, that we create these barriers for ourselves that keep us from being able to get to our goals.
Yeah, we have all these limiting beliefs that really hold us back from our potential. You know, a belief is just a thought that you've thought for a long time and doesn't make it true. It just is something that you believe, like, I'm not going to be successful. I can't affect change in the world. I can't be kind. I can't stop bad othering. You know, we have all these belief systems in place, and it takes a lot of intentional dismantling of that to come back to yourself as a person who's valuable to society and to the world in general.
So let's talk a little bit about connection. What's key in being able to show connection? Physical connection as well as emotional connection.
Connection is such a bridge between other people, obviously. And again, it's just the intention of wanting to understand another person. I know there was a time that my husband and I were staying at a hotel in San Diego, and we were in the hot tub with a family from Central California. They were in the agricultural industry. I think they built equipment for farms, and we were just talking with them and having a good time. And they brought up a situation, a political situation that I did not agree with at all. And I could have jumped in and defended my position. I chose instead to be curious about their position. And so I asked them questions to help me understand why they felt the way they felt, why they believed what they believed. And I asked questions that weren't judgmental, that weren't, intended to cause shame. I was really interested in what they believed. And as they talked, and I listened, it became very apparent that I didn't understand. I didn't understand what they had been going through. And listening to them, I completely understood. And I think that deep listening and having those curious conversations is such an easy way to connect to people, just hearing why they believe what they believe, hearing why these things are important to them without jumping in and defending it or putting them down or making them feel judged or stupid. And sometimes just keeping your mouth shut and listening is the best way to connect, because people are starving for connection right now, real connection. And I think that's apparent in the way we treat each other and the way we interact with each other. That genuine connection has to be practiced, and it has to be practiced often. And I don't think we're very good at doing that.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of psychological studies on this that say that there's actually a chemical reaction that we get to this feeling of being right. So we get into an argument with someone else and we say, hey, the most important thing I want out of this conversation is to be the winner, to be the one who comes out on top. And so in your mind, the way that you frame it is, I'm going to give my points and I'm going to be successful at trying to win this argument. Now, what that does is it releases dopamine and endorphins, and it gives you literally a sense of being high. Now, that's if you actually win. Oftentimes, you don't win. Oftentimes, the other side puts up their side, and you walk away frustrated and upset.
Right.
Interestingly enough, love releases a very similar type of high. It releases a feeling of connection, a feeling of belonging, and that high is one that's sustainable. It's not a win-lose type of situation. And what I found is that I had to, I was in office, so I admit, I think everybody who's been in office is a little bit of a narcissist or a lot of a narcissist, but there's always some amount of narcissism in there.
There's a range.
That's right. So, but I reframed it in my mind of saying, wait a minute, I don't win the conversation by getting my opinion out. The winner of this conversation is the person who learns the most. And the way to learn the most is to ask questions and to listen and to truly try to understand. And I found when I did that, I actually could, maybe not intentionally at first because it was more self-serving, but I found that I created a greater sense of connection and the ability to have friends that thought differently than I thought.
Yeah, that's huge. And having people around you that don't agree with you is huge in helping you keep yourself grounded in what is real. I teach a lot of laughter workshops for people, and laughter is such an easy connection. We always start out just making eye contact with each other. I work with a lot of work teams that spend really intense days together, and they're very uncomfortable laughing with each other. It takes a good 20 minutes for them to loosen up a little bit and to allow themselves to be silly and allow themselves to be ridiculous and allow themselves just to laugh for no reason. But they leave feeling so connected to each other because they've made eye contact, they've laughed with each other, they've maybe hugged each other, they've shaken hands, or they've hugged each other, or they've made some kind of physical connection, and they leave a much stronger team than when they first started, because it's a different kind of connection. And it's so easy to make eye contact with people, maybe a person in a grocery store, look them in the eye, tell them thank you. They almost never have that happen. And it's just those easy connections that you can practice all day long. So when you need to make the big connections, you have a background in how to do that.
All right, you have to tell me, how do you teach laughter to a couple or someone who isn't used to laughing with one another? What are the basics of that?
Yeah, I was working with a group from a bank, and there was maybe 20 people in the room. And we start off, I talk about the benefits of laughter and how laughter changes your brain and your body, and how healing laughter is. And we start really easy, just kind of laughing together, practicing laughing together. And there's always at least one or two people in the back row who sit with their arms folded, like, I am too good. I am too good just to sit here and laugh. I'm too professional and too important to just laugh with you people. And it's funny to watch that change over the time that we have together. I even had one person come up and apologize to me. He said, I didn't want to do this. I thought it was ridiculous. And he said, but now I left feeling so much more connected to this team. And we just do different laughter exercises. We laugh like villains. We laugh like animals. We laugh in place. We stretch and move our bodies. And it's such a transformative experience. It's just so much, it's a lot of fun. It's really, really silly. That's okay.
It sounds like you have to partly get the tension out of them first, although I think laughter by itself does that. I remember a guy, there was an article that was written about me when I was mayor that said that I think it was George Will, but I know George Will had written an article. In any event, the comment was that I had a self-deprecating sense of humor. So a guy came up in the middle of one of my speeches after I got done. He came up and he said, "Hey, I want to know, I read that article about you the other day, and I totally agree. You have a total self-defecating sense of humor." I said, "Well, yeah, I have probably that too." But I do find that, boy, laughter and play is so important. The ability to play with people, to have fun with them, and to let them make mistakes and play with you. It's the type of thing that creates a sense of energy. It creates a sense of enjoyment, and it's so much more important than the political issue that you're trying to resolve, of which you probably won't resolve. It's probably going to be resolved by some other political or elected body someplace else.
Yeah. And incorporating laughter into your life is so easy. It's fun to do with strangers. If you're on public transit, just start laughing and see what happens. It just kind of allow yourself to be viewed as the crazy person on the train and just see what happens around you, because it really creates fun connections with people that you have never met.
All right. So you listen to someone. I got that. And certainly laughter can help. But let's talk about, how do you actually move from that stage to seeing if you can find common ground? What are the steps to that?
I think it depends on the situation, and it depends on the people you're talking to. If you're both wanting to move toward common ground, it's so much easier. The things I like to talk about is everybody wants the same thing. They want to be safe. They want their family safe. They want to be happy. They want to be in a place where they have food and shelter. Those are the basic things everybody wants. And maybe you just start from there. Like, I see that you want to feel safe. I see that you want to feel loved or valued. And acknowledging that everybody in this world has those same things, that common ground that's why it's common, because we all want that to happen. And so if you're working with somebody who has the idea that's a little bit different from you, and you work toward each other, like, it's almost a give and take. This is what I believe. What do you believe? How can we come together to make that work? And sometimes the common ground is, when we're together, we're just not going to talk about these things. We know we're not going to come to a place where we agree. But I value your friendship. I value what you bring to my life. And there's just one area that we just don't have to talk about, because usually, like you said, talking about it isn't going to solve it, isn't going to fix it. I love you. I can accept you. I can send you love and joy and happiness. And we just don't talk about that. And maybe that as that friendship grows, those discussions can happen as you evolve your friendship, evolve your conversations. That changes, and you're not trying to convince each other that you're right, they're wrong. You're just trying to find that, wow, this is where we can both agree. And maybe it's right now, we just agree that we don't agree right now.
I found one of the things that helped me be successful is to reframe in my mind who they are. So, I'll give you an example. I have a family member who on a regular basis will watch my podcast, or they watch me in politics, and they will come up and they will tell me what I'm doing wrong, right? And sometimes it's pretty sharp in how they tell me what I'm doing wrong. They'll say, right, well, what you did wrong, and this one was blah, 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 blah. And I would find myself irritated and upset and wanting to avoid them. But then I reframed in my mind. I said, okay, so maybe she is really trying to help me get better at what I'm doing. Even though she's not doing a very good job because I'm not really listening, I'm going to try to just acknowledge that. So the next time she brought it up, instead of saying, well, I think you misunderstood, or you don't know what I was trying to do, or here's really what happened, I said, you really care about me being a success, don't you? And it was amazing how that affirmation totally changed my relationship with her. By giving her that affirmation, once she knew that I knew that this was being done with a good intent, even though it's driving me nuts, it was it was a changed relationship. And of course she said, absolutely, that's the reason why I do this. And it began to change my ability to listen. And it was funny because as I changed my ability to listen, they also changed how sharp they were in their criticism.
Hmm. That's a beautiful example. I love that. That's amazing. That's a great way of reframing that.
I definitely have found that, that's one of the keys. It's you talk about bad others. It's about saying, well, wait a minute, what's the upside into what this person is doing? I think about our country's founding. We had Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Now, Alexander Hamilton, he helped create Wall Street. He created the Treasury Department. He talked about the importance of us recognizing that the good faith and credit of the United States had to be protected at all costs. And there were things that he did that fought back and forth with Jefferson and Madison, saying, no, we can't dismiss this debt, even though speculators have bought it. We need to show the world that we can do it. But on the other hand, Madison and Jefferson, one wrote the Constitution and the other wrote the Declaration of Independence. They talked a lot about equal rights and civil rights and how it is that we had rights that should be extended to all Americans. The point is this, they didn't get along all that well, but imagine our country without either one of them. They were
Yeah.
both important. And,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes, at least for me, when I can recognize that the other person is bringing real value, even though they don't see the world the way that I do, it becomes much easier for me to endure and listen to the things that they say that I don't agree with.
Yeah, I agree. I think we go into so many conversations metaphorically armed. We're ready to defend ourselves. We're ready to shoot down their thoughts, their ideas. And I think we need to come to these conversations unarmed because when you weaponize a conversation, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get anything accomplished. So learning how to walk in vulnerable and open to their ideas, I think that's a huge way to start, is just walking in unarmed.
When you think about, like in your relationship with a spouse, one person may do a very good job of ensuring that the long-term picture is taken care of, that we're financially in a good position so our kids can do the things that they want. The other person may do a good job of saying, why don't we enjoy today? Why don't we make certain that we're spending time with one another and showing love to one another? Now, if you look at that question creates a lot of divisions between couples, a lot of division. But if you can both look at one another and recognize, you're making this relationship better through what you're doing, but I just think that we need to do this part as well. It changes your perspective of them and it changes theirs of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of connection, especially today, is compromise, learning how to compromise in ways that you both win. You both might have to give something up, but if you both win, it doesn't matter because the end outcome is better connection, better relationship, a better movement forward.
So, there are social scientists. I'd love to have your thoughts on this. There are social scientists who have studied what makes a conservative and what makes a liberal. And this isn't perfect because there are always outliers. But the general thought is that a conservative is very concerned about protection. They're concerned about outside threats, the threats from the Chinese, the threats from losing our world power, the threat from crime, the threat from somebody stealing from us. They have those types of concerns. The liberal, on the other hand, tends to be more outward looking. They're saying, well, I don't know, why not change this? Let's try something different. Let's see if this works better. Let's see if there's something here that we can improve upon the existing situation. I look at both of those two personality types and say, so which one's not needed?
Right. Yeah, they're both necessary.
So give me your thoughts on that in terms of relationships in society and what you've seen and listened to from both your podcast, your journalism, and from maybe from the comments that you get from people.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think both sides are absolutely necessary. We need to have the control and the protection. We need to have the openness and the compassion, and they need to meld together. And right now, they're not. You look at our national our national government right now, and it is not working. It hasn't worked for a while. They don't compromise. They don't have conversations. And I totally agree that we need to have both. And that's the same with any relationship, whether it's Democrat, Republican, male, female. We all have our strengths that are valuable, and we can't make that overrule the idea that they have strengths too, that we need to come together to create the best combination of skills and abilities and ideas that move us forward. I'm more of an independent, like you. I see both sides. I see things that need to happen, that need to bring us together on both sides, where both sides need to give a little bit and move a little bit closer, and not be so, have their heels dug in so strong that they're not willing. They're just not willing to move. And you can't work with that when someone's not willing to change or to compromise or to soften. Nothing gets done. And that's where we are with our government right now. We're at a standstill. Nothing's being accomplished because both sides have dug their heels in, and the people are tired. They're tired of watching things happen, that nothing changes, nothing gets done because they're just not working together. And I think at the local levels of government, which as a community reporter, I've covered local government for years, that's where the real conversations are happening. Go to your local community council meeting, go to your city council meeting, give them your input, give them your feedback. Those are where the decisions are being made that really affect you and your family. And go there without the idea of attacking or without the idea of you have the right ideas, but going with the idea that you can bring something to the table to help bring things closer together. Because starting at the local level, you can affect change. That's where change happens, especially for people in communities. That's where it happens. You know that as a mayor, that's where change happens.
Yeah, I think all change happens with individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So, we go to Congress and we have these two parties that think that they have an idea of what has to happen in the nation. The idea is so strong and so important in their minds that they demonize the other side.
Yep.
And they, the only thing that tends to matter in that system is who has the majority and who wants the majority, right? Because you want the power so that you can implement your ideas. So in the process, you demonize the other person. Now, the question is, well, how do we fix that? There's only one way. It's the same way we fix everything. It's somebody crosses the aisle and says, hey, I think the ideas that you have are crazy, but I want to understand them better. Tell me where you're coming from.
Yep.
What was the path that you came to get here? Why do you see it that way? And then hopefully they listen to you and you can give them your ideas. And over time, you start to find some ground that's in the middle. Local governments work better. Well, 70% of local governments in the country are nonpartisan. And the
Right.
fact that they're nonpartisan makes it easier for people to sit down and listen to people as individuals as opposed to listening to them as a representative of some massive viewpoint.
Yeah, I think we're so focused on what isn't being done that we're not being focused on what is being done at the local level. And maybe that's where you start. You just start locally and donate your time or get involved with nonprofits, with charities, be generous, listen to people, work with other groups that you don't necessarily hang out with all the time, and just immerse yourself in the variety of life that we have. We have so much, our vision is so limited. We don't go outside of our vision very often, but there are so many opportunities for us to listen to different points of view, find ways to help in a community that might be misrepresented or underrepresented, and listen to their stories because it will change you.
Yeah, it's you talked about in the very beginning of the podcast, that idea that you dropped someone off and you saw their political sign talking about who they supported. Well, that's also something you can hear. You can be talking to someone and then they'll drop some little bomb about who they support that maybe you're not a supporter of. And that can be on either side when you're an independent, because
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
extremes, independents tend to be more driven by trying to find middle ground. Even though they may come with an ideology, they want to see people as an individual as opposed to being a member of a group. But the key is, and I found this with my family members, they would say that, and then I would get mad at them. Or I would say something, and they would get mad at me. And so what would happen is, let's just use Trump for a second, maybe I give up on them because they like Donald Trump. Here's the answer to that question. Whatever you do, don't give up on people you love for people you don't even know.
Right.
I don't know Donald Trump, right? And not, nor am I probably ever going to, nor am I going to have an effect either way at changing how he sees things.
Right.
But the person that I know that's right in front of me, that's value. That's real value. And going back to Congress, I think the mistake is they need to quit seeing this from a global picture and start thinking about, hey, maybe there's a reason our founders had us all sit in here together, had us all try to work out these issues collectively.
America has been a beacon to the world for so long. People come here expecting the very best, and we have so many great people doing so many great things. There's such a hope and an optimism here, even despite all of our differences and our divides and the rhetoric. The people of this country are so good. There's so much more good than they are bad, if you want to use the good bad term. There's so many more people being kind and doing good things than there are people trying to destroy this country. And America is such a beautiful ideal. And we need to remember that what we were founded for was equality and working together and to create a nation that is a beacon to the world. When America shows up, we usually are really respected. Maybe not so much lately, but we're really respected. And we've lost that somewhere. We've lost that as individuals. We've lost that idea of patriotism in our communities. It almost has become a swear word in some populations. Yeah. And that's wrong. Our country is amazing. And to see it demonized, let America becoming the bad other has been really hard the past few years, when I don't agree with that. I think it's great to love your country. It's great to love what it stands for, but we also have to work to make that happen, to make that dream a reality, to make that ideal true. And that takes everybody in this country, not just our governors, not just our leaders, everybody to come together. And that's a lot of work and a lot of practice, but it's there. It's possible.
We've had a central narrative for a long time. The central narrative, it's established in the Constitution, but its moral doctrine was the Declaration of Independence. That idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, all people are created equal, and that we're endowed upon by rights that were given to us by our Creator. Now, that concept, what it really was, is it was saying, we're going to put the individual over the rights of government. And we're going to give them a whole set of rights. Property rights in the 5th and 14th Amendment, the right to assemble, the right to pick your own church, the Second Amendment, which is controversial today.
Right.
But all of them centered around the very first right, which was freedom of speech. And the logic to that freedom of speech has been, how do we resolve problems in a society when we know that there's a difference amongst people? Now, one way is this organic thought that really monarchies were based upon, that said, well, here's what we do. We pick one good leader, or we have one good leader. They're above the fray, and they can decide for all of us what the right decision is. Now, hopefully you get a good leader. If you have a bad leader, things start to go wrong. But nonetheless, if you believe in that system, you can't have freedom of speech to speak out against them, because the minority would speak out against what they were doing. And I don't mean the minority in terms of race. I'm talking about the minority of opinion will speak out against them, and it might upset what was taking place. Now, we looked at that and we said, no, there has to be an ability for us to self-govern. There has to be an ability for us to be able to collectively decide what we want to do and what's in our best interest. The reason that free speech was the first of those amendments is because the thinking was, hey, if people speak up, the best ideas go to the surface. Now, that means that you have to, A, be willing to speak up, and B, be willing to listen, and then to think about, hey, maybe is my position right, or is my position wrong? Or maybe can I modify my position to some degree as I've listened to these other sides? Again, I take that back to the individual relationship. There is no individual relationship that works if you're not willing to do that. If you are a tyrant in a relationship, it's not going to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think it's interesting, so much of the prejudice and the racism and And the ideology that separates us is rooted generational. I mean, it goes back generations and generations, and it's just been perpetrated. And we've just inherited that without questioning why we feel this way. There's a great story. There's a young monk who goes to a monastery, and he's working with the monks in the room where they're transcribing, they're copying the scripture onto new text, they're illustrating it, they're making it beautiful for the future. And the young monks realizes that they're using a copy to create the new copies. And he says, well, what if there's a mistake? What if a mistake was made years ago? We're just perpetrating that same mistake over and over and over. And so he went to the abbot and he said, Father, I'm really concerned about this. What if we've made a mistake in the transcriptions? Have you ever checked it against the original text? And the abbot said, that's a great point. I'll go downstairs into our cave or to our archives. I'm going to compare some things. And so the abbot goes downstairs into the caves with the archives, and the young monk is waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting. And finally, after a long time, he goes down to the archives to see if the monk was in trouble, if the father needed help. And he finds the abbot just crying, just banging his head against the floor, and tears are streaming down his face. And the young monk says, Father, what's wrong? What happened? And the monk says, the word was celebrate. And it had been handed down as celibate for so long because someone had mistranslated it. And but we don't go down into our histories, into our roots. My grandmother was very prejudiced, and I grew up listening to her. But my mom would say, Grandma believes that, but we know that's not true. And so she was breaking those generational prejudices and racism. And hopefully I'm doing the same thing for my kids and my grandkids. Now that person we might not agree with them, but they're a good person. They deserve to be loved. But it's so much of it is traced back generationally. And unless you're willing to go back to see where your roots of prejudice and racism comes from, we can't change it until you identify it and pull it out. And that's the point where we are right now, is we need to investigate ourselves and our histories to see why we're not willing to compromise, why we're so convinced that we're right. Because we're not always right. We're wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah, I also believe, one, there's an arc in history, meaning change is evolutionary. Thomas Jefferson talked a lot about that the next generation will see the last generation as being barbaric. But there also should be some understanding of what was taking place. So, we go back to those comments about all people being created equal. When we left the monarchy, where decisions were being made for us regardless of our input, the idea wasn't to create a perfect union. That just wasn't the idea. It was to create a more perfect union, a union that was more perfect than the one that we were leaving. And over time, it would improve. Now, when you think about these comments about all people being created equal, it was inevitable that was going to lead to a civil war. In fact, if you go back to the founders, I think there were 56 people. I might have that number one or two wrong, but 56 people in the original Continental Congress. And a couple of things that came out of it that were important. One was that 23 of them didn't want to talk. They wanted to put slavery into the Constitution to make certain it was protected. The majority said no. Said no, we're not going to put that in. It was intentional.
Right.
It was intentional that it wasn't in the Constitution, and they knew. There were people who knew that there had to be a change on that issue. Now, eventually, that idea that we're all created equal led to a great civil war where 500,000 Americans ended up being killed, and we created a change. You could look at the issue of slavery and say, well, why is slavery immoral? Because it's been around for 5,000 years. Right? The Egyptians had it. Almost every society. My background is mainly Swedish. Well, the Vikings, the word slave came from the Slavs that they were able to capture, right? And that they were able to imprison or to make their spouse or their assistant or whatever it was that they wanted them to be. But they were slaves. The point is this, that concept that all human beings are worthy of dignity, that all human beings are deserving of equality based upon the rights given to them by their creator, it was inevitable. Slavery would be seen as being immoral. The reason that we focus on 1776 being the foundation of this country is because that's when the moral doctrine of who we are and the central narrative of what we believe in came about. Well, that was also inevitable that was going to lead to the suffrage movement, where women were empowered. It was also inevitable that was going to lead to the civil rights movements and the human rights movement and the equal rights movement, because effectively, people are saying, no, I'm deserving of the same dignity of anyone else. I should be seen in the same way. Now, it's not perfect today, but it is better than it was 50 years ago. And 50 years ago is better than it was 150 years ago. 150 years ago is better than it was 300 years ago. There's an arc, and we're moving in the right direction. Our heroes are those people that honor that concept. Martin Luther King was not a perfect human being, not by a long stretch. The things that he did to women that happened with him and with women probably wouldn't survive in today's society. But he moved that ball forward. He moved that idea that all people are created equal forward in a way in which was significant. So he is one of our heroes. Being a hero doesn't mean you're a perfect human being. There's a way to respect our heroes, respect our past, and also recognize that doesn't mean that everything that we did 260 years ago was right. There are a lot of things that we were doing wrong, and there are things we're doing wrong today.
Yeah.
We're just on an arc of improving this.
Yeah, I think going along with that, I think it's an evolution of consciousness. We evolved to want to have more peace. We evolved to want to be better people. You look at the way the world reacted to the war in Ukraine and the way the world's reacting to the war right now in the Middle East. It's outrage. The majority of people think that we are above war. Why is war happening still? Haven't we evolved to the point where we don't need to do the land grabs and all the horrible atrocities that happen with that? And I think as we continue to evolve, and as the young people evolve, who seem to be a lot more inclusive than even my generation, which I think we're pretty inclusive, but it's even more. It's becoming more together. They want better things for all people. And it's an evolution of consciousness that's going to continue until hopefully we can reach a point where we're working together as a global society, because we're all we have. There's no planet yet that we can evacuate to. This is it. Taking that space eye view of this world that's so fragile and beautiful, and we're spending time destroying it, destroying each other, and there's no plan B. There's
no plan B.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, well, Peri, this has been a very enjoyable conversation. I'm hopeful we can get you on again. I do think that the big issues that you talk about in your podcast are so important. The issues of kindness, finding the truth, being the light, understanding the importance of dealing with our fear and having the courage to stand up to those things that oftentimes inside of us keep us from accomplishing our full potential. You're doing a wonderful job on it. I encourage people to listen. Can you give people, if they want to listen to your podcast, where they might go?
Yeah, it's Life and Laughter. It's on Spotify, Apple, all the streaming podcasts. You can also follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Life and Laughter Coaching. I've loved this conversation, Paul. It's been just great talking to you. You have some wonderful ideas, and I think what you're doing is so necessary, absolutely necessary.
Well, thank you, Peri. All right. Thanks again. Thanks for being with us on The Optimistic American.
Thank you.
In the beginning of this podcast, I told you that if you can figure out how to work with people who you don't agree with, Democrats or Republicans, conservatives or liberals, you'll make your life happier, you'll figure out how to make more money, and you'll end up creating a better version of yourself. That's really what we're all about. And rekindling the American spirit, that can only happen if we learn to work with people who maybe aren't exactly like us. That's the whole idea to what happened or what we did in this grand American experiment. Now, if you like what we're saying and what we're doing, press that subscribe button. If you have comments where you disagree with us, I promise you I read every one of those comments, even some of those that end up being a little bit angry. But nonetheless, we appreciate your comments. It helps us learn and get better. And last, if you like what it is that we're doing, maybe even become a premium member by going to optamerican.com/premium. In any event, thank you so much for being here. Godspeed, and we appreciate you being a part of the Optimistic American show today. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.